So guys, fantastic news. NIO just signed on with a new massive partner when it comes to battery swap. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does NIO have to gain monetary wise from these partnerships? So before I tell you what this new partner is, and they've already signed it, let's first listen to the CEO explain what NIO has to gain from these partnerships. And this is very important for all NIO shareholders to listen to. So let's have a listen first.
You've launched 4 generations of stations and signed many contracts for battery swap stations.
Will Williams start to open battery swap stations for franchising or investment?
Our direction with the battery swap stations is such that because everyone knows we're still pushing forward with research and development ongoing, currently the whole company is definitely still on the path to profitability.
Although by the end of last year we still had over 50 billion yuan in cash, there are many areas that need money. So originally, our battery swap stations were funded by ourselves, and we spent a lot of money building over 2,000 swap stations.
Our next step will be to treat these battery swap stations as fixed assets and seek external borrowing or partnerships.
For instance, we signed an agreement with the Anhui Energy Group this January and with Zhong'an Energy, and we announced a strategic cooperation with Nanwang on August 26th, which essentially means we will build battery swap stations together.
They will construct the swap stations and we will operate them. The operation belongs to us and the battery swap station to them. Basically, this is the model.
So if you take a look at our cooperative partners, generally they are state-owned and relatively wealthy enterprises. Their capital costs are also relatively low, and they are willing to hold these assets.
In fact, they see us and say, just like our factories, land, and buildings are all state-owned investment brands to hold, leasing to us, it actually makes no sense for us to spend money to purchase these. My funds are definitely most reasonable when spent on research and development. It is not the most efficient to spend on fixed assets, so we will continue with such cooperations.
But currently our main openness externally is to cooperate with these state-owned enterprises and large businesses. So when collaborating with private businesses and individuals, we must be more cautious. Relatively speaking, let's take one step at a time. If our business is very stable, if people are willing to do these things, we will also explore some ways. Then, of course, we are willing to do these things. I myself have never been particularly, how should I say it, eager to do business without regard for my friends. This has always scared me. Ultimately, if the business doesn't do well and relationships with friends and others don't end well, it will be more troublesome. So if we want to do it, we desire to make these things simpler. In doing business in other companies, everyone has their own risk assessment. They all have their capabilities. That is, to do business with users, one must be cautious. One must be noticeably cautious. Okay, thank you.
That's right, guys. NIO is partnering up with government-backed, state-owned enterprises, especially energy grid companies, to build swap stations. This is huge, all right? There's benefits for both parties. For NIO, of course, the first benefit is more swap stations, okay? That's a no-brainer. Second one, reduced cash expense. They don't have to spend the money to build out those swap stations. And the third one is, of course, standardization of swap. We've seen, NIO CEO has said, Anhui government has already promised they're definitely going to deliver 1,000 swap stations. So that's crazy, 1,000 swap stations. And then Southern China Grid also partnering up, and they're going to build swap stations together. Zhong'an, and then also today, all right, this is the partner. Well, actually, yesterday they signed Suzhou's power grid. So State Grid Suzhou Power Supply Company and NIO Energy signed a cooperation agreement in Suzhou. The two sides will carry out cooperation in charging and swapping services and virtual power plants to further enhance the adjustable capacity of flexible resources such as electric vehicles, continue to explore the standards for vehicle network interaction, enable more new energy vehicles to access the power grid to obtain benefits, and jointly commit to the construction of new power systems. So of course, for these partners, they also have a lot of huge advantages by choosing a NIO and partnering up with NIO for these swap stations. So for example, for the partners, they see it as a fixed return with swap revenue. So of course, these state grid companies, they have their own charging system, but they're also going to have these swap stations, these public swap stations, and they're going to be earning some revenue from battery swaps. So it's, very high capital intensive, but these state-owned companies, energy grid companies, are very, very wealthy, okay? And with their risk assessment, it's a no-brainer for them. So on top of fixed returns with swap revenue, they also have self-grid stabilization with additional energy trading revenue. So that's right, they can stabilize their own grid, especially we've seen back in 2022 in the summer, Sichuan had a blackout because the energy grid had a major imbalance of power. So with this, they're able to really reduce the risk of that and also earn some money, right? They can store electricity in the swap stations when it's cheap and then sell it when it's very expensive. So they can do this themselves. So it's like there's so many benefits. And then another big benefit is, of course, no operating headaches. If they were to do this themselves, it would be very difficult. But because NIO operates them, they basically just have to fork out the money and forget about it, basically. And NIO's going to handle everything for them. Wow, sounds like a perfect deal. And this, by the way, is them putting cash in a categorically correct investment. It just makes sense for them to spend their spare money and invest in these swap stations instead of like buying a shopping mall or investing in a movie production. So that doesn't make sense for the state grid to do projects like that. And charging is very crowded, so it's a very good area for them to invest and see a very good fixed return. Now, one potential thing that could complicate things are the free battery swaps that a lot of early NIO owners have. Now, don't worry about that, all right? But of course, before all this, when NIO was building their own swap stations, it's sort of like, imagine a company provides free gasoline for you, but they're also building out those gas stations. So that's a very huge expenditure. But now they're building out the swap stations and NIO is just providing the free battery swaps. So basically, I think how it'll work is if I go to one of these public swap stations and swap, it's still going to be free for me, but NIO will be paying the bill. But at the end of the day, it's still much cheaper than NIO building their own swap station, right? One swap station costs around 1.5 million RMB. It's probably more expensive for Gen 4 swap stations, but with 1.5 million RMB and the average energy per swap of 60 kilowatt hours and energy cost of 80 cents to 1 RMB per kilowatt hour, you can do 25,000 free swaps with the money you saved from building one swap station, okay? And on top of that, NIO doesn't have to worry about swap station rent. So NIO is pushing for the standardization of swap. This is what's upcoming in terms of the swap station game. It's massive. These big energy companies, government-backed, are backing NIO and hopping into the swap train, which is just absolutely amazing, guys. So investors can expect more swap stations, less capex, and future standardization. This is very, very good, guys. As always, stay safe, stay healthy. Peace out.